through education and advocacy. The mission of the League of Women Voters is to empower voters and defend democracy. We envision a democracy where every person has the right, desire, and the knowledge and the confidence to participate. The League of Women Voters of Boulder County works throughout the year to help empower voters and defend democracy. If you want to donate to our work or lend your time and skills to encourage civic engagement for all people in a nonpartisan manner, please join us. All the information you need is at lwvbc.org. The League of Women Voters of Boulder County strives to be an anti-racist organization, one that works to eliminate systems of oppression within our organization and in our political systems. We acknowledge that the suffrage movement and the League itself has often excluded women and other people based on their race, ethnicity, gender orientation, and more. We are seeking to right those wrongs, be increasingly inclusive and just, and ensure that our organization is truly empowering all people. We want these same things from our government agencies as well. And that's why we're so happy to be hosting this event tonight. Our moderator this evening is Shakita Yarbrough, League member and Director at Large for the League of Women Voters of Boulder County Board. Shakita works for the YWCA of Boulder County as the Director of Community Engagement and Equity. She is a committed change agent in Boulder County and the founder of Families of Color Colorado, and also Voice Our Power, which calls for individuals to step up and step into change. You can find out more about Shakita's organization at www.voiceourpower.com. And now I'll turn things over to Shakita.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this evening. Thank you for wanting to learn more about what's going on in Boulder County and the city of Boulder. I just ask that if you have any questions throughout tonight, please put your questions in the chat. I myself or Mandy will be able to relay those questions to our panelists. So tonight we welcome you, and we also welcome our panelists. We are so happy to have Amy Kane and Carrie Inosta. And sorry if I didn't know, she said I pronounced it correctly. So first I want to say that, Amy, as the City of Boulder's Equity Program Manager, Amy Kane is a trusted, passionate, and collaborative equity compliance dedicated to addressing institutional racism and optimizing outcomes for those who experience the most marginalization. She is committed to advancing racial equity and improving outcomes for people by investing in their power through education, outreach, and data-driven strategic policy and program design. Amy graduated with a BA in Communication Disorders and Speech Science from the University of Colorado and has been with the City of Boulder since 2005. People are what's most important to Amy, who passionately believes none of us thrive unless we all thrive. And Carrie is the daughter of second-generation Japanese American parents. She was born and raised in Arizona, where her parents found themselves after the forced internment and relocation of Japanese families during World War II. While attending CU, Carrie was captivated by the wilderness around Boulder and in living by the passionate social justice community she found here. Today, as a certified practitioner of protocol for courageous conversations about race, Carrie serves Boulder County as a racial equity warrior and humble member of a collective of folks working to advance racial equity in local government. As a bridge builder, Carrie believes deeply in the power of our collective humanity and in our connection to nature. She knows the privileges she enjoys today as a resident of Boulder, along with her husband, Jeff, and son, Ben, are the result of the labor and love of her family, her ancestors, and all those who have struggled in solidarity for her right to the opportunity and access. Thank you both for being here this evening. I appreciate you. So I think let's start with Amy.
All right, let me share my screen. Let's make sure I can do this appropriately. You see that okay?
Yes.
Excellent. This is good stuff. All right. Thank you, Shakita. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and good evening to everyone here. It is absolutely a pleasure to be here presenting to you this evening about the City of Boulder's racial equity work. And it's even more of a privilege to get to be presenting with my colleague and friend and one of my favorite people in the world, Carrie. It's just so great to be able to share this space with you tonight. So my name is Amy Kane, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I identify as a white cisgender female. And so before I dive into the city's newly adopted racial equity plan, I thought it would be helpful to really set the stage about how the city got to the point of drafting and adopting this plan. So what I'm sure many of you know is that race is the greatest predictor of one's access to success measures in our current systems, and that racial inequities are embedded into government within all levels, which really has caused disparate impacts on communities who have traditionally been excluded from government and other institutions. So by focusing on advancing racial equity initially, we have the opportunity to introduce a framework, tools, and resources that can be applied to other priority populations based on ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, ability, class, and age, among others. So if one of us suffers, we truly all do suffer. And that was a question we got when we started this work at the City of Boulder, is why are we focusing on race? So I really like to set that foundation in these conversations. So racial equity is closing the gap so that race isn't the predictor of one's access to success, but it also helps improve outcomes for everyone. And so to close those gaps, the City of Boulder government is shifting its focus on communities of color to support those who've been unjustly burdened by racial inequity. And so what this slide is really conveying is that we're talking about equity versus equality. You hear a lot of those terms being used interchangeably, and equality is really treating everyone the same, regardless of their circumstances or whether outcomes remain equal. While equity acknowledges that different people start in different places due to racist historical context and societal circumstances, and equity helps level the playing field for everyone to achieve success equally. So you can see we use this image of the bikes, right? If we gave everybody the exact same bike, there's obviously disconnects for folks, and not everybody can utilize the bike as they need to. So also to set the context for the city's specific racial equity work, we created a plan that acknowledged some of the history of our city. This history, like most others in the US, is one of colonialism and racial oppression. And while white settlers began to prosper in Boulder County, racism raised its head in very different forms, including through the KKK and other racist organizations. So throughout the war and post-war decades, segregation existed in Boulder as elsewhere in the nation, and the effects are really the same. So those disparities that happened back then exist today. And so our city human services strategy references several ways in which historically excluded community members are still experiencing disparities by income, affordable housing, health, and education, just to name a few. This graphic that we have here is a city, it's a city map, and it's called a race dot map. And it shows the city population as different colored dots for various racial and ethnic groups. So the blue dots that you see are for the white residents, green for African American and African American and Black community members, red are for Asian Americans, orange are for the Latinx community. And so what you can see here is that even though the city doesn't technically have a housing segregation policy like redlining, it's still very easy to spot where the lower income and where some of the manufactured housing communities are. And so just you can really see by this map where non-white resident community members reside. So I also want to just talk really quickly. I don't want to assume everybody has a good context of the different levels of racism and how that really manifests itself. But you can really think of this like three levels, the three different levels as cogs in a very complex system that really perpetuates racial disparity. So institutional racism are the policies, practices, and procedures that work better for white people than for people of color, often unintentionally or inadvertently. Oftentimes, it's very deliberate. Structural racism. So think about how the lack of affordable health care and access to affordable healthy food options, you couple that with a higher exposure to toxic chemicals and other forms of pollution, you couple that with job discrimination and housing segregation and producing greater health problems, you get shorter lifespans, lower wages, and greater levels of poverty for communities of color. So a lot of people, when they hear the term racism, they immediately think of individual racism or the prejudgment or bias or discrimination by an individual person based on race. I think a lot of us were socialized to think of it that way and not to really understand, particularly those of us who are white, that there's this larger system at play, that we are all breathing the air and really operating in these systems. So the City of Boulder's racial equity work is focused primarily on institutional and structural levels. So this requires us, but also goes beyond just addressing racism at the individual level. So the work that we're doing ahead really focuses on our programs, policies, and then also where our funding is allocated. That's a really important point to think about, is where you're putting your money. So that being said, at the interpersonal level, we are still working with our colleagues, members of council, our boards and commissions through our new bias and microaggression workshops, which we started rolling out to colleagues across the organization, the city organization this fall. So I don't know if Carrie's going to mention this too, but we are both members of the GARE network. And in 2018, the City of Boulder became members in partnership with other communities with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, which you'll hear a lot of people say GARE. So the city's doing the GARE work. And it's like, no, this is all of our work. GARE is a member organization who we learn a lot from, and a cohort where we can all work together. It's a network of local governments who are working to achieve racial equity and advance opportunities for all. When we joined the organization, I think there were about 50 cities across the United States, and I think now that they're really up to over 200 who are focusing on institutional and structural racism. It seems like every time I look at their map, there's more local communities that are working on this. And the belief is that local and regional government really has that ability and the responsibility to implement policy change at multiple levels and across multiple sectors, so we can drive larger systemic change. So the GARE theory of change centers on the visualization of racial equity through a cycle of normalizing. So think about training, getting people more familiar with the concepts, and then also building a movement within the organization who will enact change. Then they do organizing. And so an example of organizing is the city's newly adopted racial equity plan, and the outlining policy and cultural transformation through its goals, its strategies, and the actions. Then we're getting into the operationalizing space, where we start putting the plan into action and we start implementing the tools and collect the data to assess our results. And you can see that this is an iterative cycle, because it feeds off of each other. You learn, you grow, you change. You learn, you grow, you change. And so that's why when we implemented this original racial equity plan, we said this is going to be a 3-year process, and we need the flexibility within to update annually or as things change. Nobody predicted the pandemic was going to be happening. Probably somebody did, but it wasn't City of Boulder local government employees. And we really had to pivot how we were doing our work moving forward. And so allowing the flexibility to do that change is incredibly important. And we may learn that some things that we're trying aren't working based on the data, and so we'll need to pivot. So the plan itself, that was shaped by community input. In 2017, the city produced an inclusivity and perceptions assessment, and people showed up and they really shared courageous stories Also, at our sessions that were hosted by our Human Relations Commission and the City Council, we've had frequent conversations with organizations that work with less connected communities, and then also through our participation with the diversity summits hosted at the University of Colorado Boulder. Based on all the information that we collected, a staff team from our racial equity core team drafted a racial equity plan outline, and then we created this group here of these fine communities. These are a racial equity engagement working group. And this group of community members helped us create a robust public engagement plan so we could collect information through community partner feedback sessions. Initially, we started facilitating these in person, but then we had to shift to Zoom because of the pandemic, and just wanted to be incredibly for our community members. And then we also hosted feedback on our city online engagement platform called Be Heard Boulder. We had a lot of people look at Be Heard Boulder, but very few people actually, it was a handful of people gave comments on the plan through that space. So what we found was going to communities is really where we were able to get the best feedback. It's not a great picture when you blow it up, but that's our team. So as we heard in the 2017 perception survey, the immediate and obvious impact was on community members of color. So as the group, as recommended by the Equity Engagement Working Group, we focused our bandwidth and resources in ensuring that outreach specifically engaged community members of color. And we included their perspectives, thoughts, and their lived experience, and did a lot of changes to the plan based on that. And you can see here just kind of what that engagement looked like. We asked folks to read the plan ahead of time. We had it available in English and in Spanish. We were able to host at least 10 feedback sessions. One was with our Nepali community, and that was the first time the city had done outreach specifically for that community. So we were very happy that we were able to get some of that feedback. So here's what we said was the outcome. This is the outcome that we put as the main thing that we are trying to accomplish as an organization. And that's that the city of Boulder will advance racial equity by ensuring that its policies, programs, and practices are free from institutional and systemic racism. We pledge to work collaboratively to support a high quality of life and access to opportunity for community members of all races and ethnicities. And when we first put together this outcome, it was a little soft. And so by community feedback, we said, okay, we will advance racial equity. We had like strive or something in the initial iteration, but community feedback said, are you doing this or not? And our answer is yes, we are doing this. So the very first goal, we tried to be a little pithy and keep our goals high level with an explanation beyond that. And I don't want to have to read for everybody what the goals and strategies are, but the high level goal for the pithy is that everybody gets it. And so an action or an activity that supports this goal is like the robust equity trainings that we've been rolling out to all levels of our organization. And this includes our council members, also members of our boards and commissions. And then that goes back to that normalizing phase that I mentioned earlier. And then 2, we said justly do it. We thought we were being kind of cute there. It was a punchy end of the day decision, but it rang, it stuck. And that's really making sure that we're taking action to end racial equity within our city services. So stopping just talking about it and morphing into doing it. So aligning with strategy 2.2 here is operationalizing the city's racial equity instrument. And so we have a staff team members who started hosting workshops with our racial equity instrument. And we've been working to align specific projects that align with council priorities for 2021. So we can generate some case studies to further enhance this training. So another example of where we'll be utilizing and have been utilizing the racial equity instrument is in the COVID-19 vaccination distribution along with our partners at Boulder County Public Health. Goal number 3 is community commitment. And so that's really strengthening those partnerships and collaborating with community members and organizations. So our partnerships with Boulder County and then, so like if you're thinking about what might be an action for this, it's really understanding our history and ensuring where we learn from that history and where we can do better. And that's why we've incorporated such an extensive racial equity story at the beginning of this plan. For those of you who were engaged through the kind of adoption process, we first brought the plan to council in December for their feedback, and they spent a great deal of time talking about the history that we had written. And so we did make some edits and dove deeper into the history, quite frankly. And so we'll continue this process throughout our future work. One of the outcomes with this particular goal is we are in the process of renaming our city municipal building to the Penfield Tate Municipal Building in honor of Boulder's first and only Black mayor. So goal 4 is power to all the people. And so aligning with this strategy is 4.6. So this past year, the city hired its first language access coordinator to support this goal. And this is an example of ensuring that we have dedicated staff to coordinate and lead the strategies and work efforts across our organization. So this isn't about one of us. We really need to ensure that we're allocating the critical resources personally, but as well as financially to accomplish this work. And then our final goal, goal 5, representation matters. And we recognize that, and especially as we're thinking of, we're having this conversation tonight with this group who's really focused on our democracy. And our democracy at the local government level is often built by a very small number of people participating in that democracy. So while focusing on the City of Boulder workforce is critical, so is ensuring their city advisory boards, our commissions, our working groups, our boards have the least amount of barriers for historically excluded people. So similar to how the Police Oversight Task Force and our Police Oversight Panel were put together, that's going to be one of the top priorities that I'm gearing up to do in 2021. So more information on that later. And so with that, there's my contact information. I thank you for having me here, and I can't wait to hear what some of the work is happening over with my colleague over at Boulder County. And I will stop my share.
Thank you, Amy. We already have some questions in our chat, and we'll get to those questions after our presentations, and keep the questions coming and put it in the chat so we can have them ready for our panelists afterwards. And so now, Carrie, it's your turn. You can share your screen and provide your presentation as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Shakita. And thank you, Amy. All right, hang on. Let me find the right screen. Make sure you guys can see it. Are you guys seeing that? Okay, good. So my name is Carrie Inoshita, and I was, as Shakita said in the intro, I was born and raised in Glendale, Arizona, as I'm a third generation Japanese American woman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I live now in South Boulder, and I have lived here for about 20 years. And I just like to start off by acknowledging that the land that I live on today is within the territories of the Hinoe, Cheyenne, and Ute peoples. And I acknowledge that Boulder County, the institution that I represent, was founded on the exclusion and attempted erasure of Indigenous peoples and cultures. And I acknowledge the American Indian presence today in Boulder County, past generations and future generations. So I was very entertained by Amy's presentation because it's so similar to much of our thinking here in Boulder County. So when I think about what we are doing, really primarily, first and foremost, we're working to center race at all levels of the organization. And as Amy pointed out, that is at the individual level, at the interpersonal and organizational, and to the extent that we have any influence at the structural level. And just like Amy, I have some slides about why race, right? Race is a persistent outcome predictor. And I, all day long, I get to see, I don't know if get to see is actually the right expression, but information about the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 on communities of color. And this one recently really caught my eye. If you look at the little note from our Boulder County Public Health Epidemiology team there at the bottom, you'll see that what this chart is telling us is that the average age of Hispanic and Latinx residents who have died cumulatively since the beginning of the pandemic, as of a week ago, is 7 years younger than their than white counterparts. So, we are all working towards a time when race is not a predictor of these kinds of outcomes. The second reason for why race, in my mind, is that government has played a historic role in creating the racial disparities that we have today through laws and policies. Just like Amy so eloquently pointed out, the disparities that we see today can be traced back to policies that are historic and that government had a role in creating. The thing on the right-hand side there is just my note to say government also has an opportunity and a responsibility and a role to change things. So this is a resolution that was adopted by Boulder County in 2018. Actually, it was late 2018, October, declaring structural racism a public health crisis. So I think we have a responsibility and we have a powerful role to address disparities. The third reason for me about why race and I think we get this question a lot when we do this work is we're not really trying to make this an oppression marathon, right? It's not who's more oppressed than anyone else. But we are leading explicitly with race, not exclusively, because doing so helps us lift everyone up. And the reason I have this graphic is it came from an article that I read about the challenges that Black women face navigating race and gender in the workplace. And so if you think about that, if what we are working to do is raise up Black women in the workplace, then doesn't that help all women? And I always issue this challenge to people, I think about it for myself, right? If I think about any marginalized group, people in poverty, LGBTQ folks, I try to think about a situation in which people of color or BIPOC are not more severely impacted in any of those groups. I'd love to have somebody email me if they can think of one where that's not the case. So how does it look to center racial equity in Boulder County? So we have a strategy that's very similar to the city of Boulder. But we have two primary tools that we're using to do that. On the left side there, I know it's pretty small, but we are engaging with Pacific Education Group, and they have a protocol. It's called Courageous Conversations About Race. And that really is our way of working fundamentally with the personal and interpersonal side of centering racial equity. And then we're also working with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. This is some information for Courageous Conversations About Race. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is Courageous Conversations About Race is a protocol that helps people have conversations. When you think about our implicit bias and our ability to come to the table and have a conversation about race, Boulder County is focusing on this as a fundamental strategy, as a core strategy. So we really believe that that I'm looking for I think I'm missing a slide, but we really believe that interruption starts with I, and that if I, as an Asian American woman, can't bring my whole self in any conversation about policy, about work, then I'm not really going to feel included in my workplace. And I'm not going to be able to really bring that racialized lens to any kind of policy decisions or guidelines or any kind of operational work that my organization is doing. And capacity to have that conversation is difficult. So if we think about the way that we have, there's so much taboo about talking about race. We have been encouraged as citizens and residents of this country and this culture, we've been encouraged to be colorblind, to pretend like it doesn't exist, like it's not an issue. So the ability to talk about it is something that we feel is very important. And we have been, this is, largely what we've been doing is working internally to build this capacity. So we have about half of the county that's completed this training, Introduction to Courageous Conversations About Race. And we have 11 certified practitioners. We have 4 more graduating soon. And we're sort of spreading this work out across the county little by little. Also by doing book studies and deepening conversations with each other. The other side of the work is our partnership with GARE. So just like Amy and the City of Boulder are doing, we became a partner with the Government Alliance for Race and Equity in 2018, I believe. And so GARE is, as Amy described, a national network of government agencies, and up and down the Front Range. It's not just us in City of Boulder, but City of Fort Collins, City of Denver, Adams County and Jefferson County. There are a number of other partners up and down the Front Range and in the West. And as Amy pointed out, there's this national shared practice of normalizing the conversation, and which is very much what we're doing with Courageous Conversations About Race, organizing and operationalizing the work. And one of the key things for operationalizing the work is what we are calling a racial equity impact assessment tool. And I believe that Amy refers to that as something else. But yeah, it's very much, it's basically a series of questions. So how is whatever your proposed program, how is your budget who is it benefiting? Who does it burden, for instance? Have you consulted with the community when you're looking at these budget decisions? Have you examined the consequences, unintended consequences? Have you developed strategies to mitigate those? So we are embedding this racial equity tool in our operations. Most clearly, we are doing it in the pandemic. We are, the pandemic, however you want to think about it, I mean, it has provided just this kind of kick that we really have tried to take advantage of to embed racial equity in our practices. So I think before, everyone had the best of intentions to get moving, but boy, when the pandemic hit, we really, really worked hard to embed racial equity at every turn. And part of the way that's working for us is that we are using this racial equity impact assessment to look at, for instance, our vaccine rollout, our use of the CARES funding, our use of communications, everywhere we can. And the way that we are doing that is with racial equity practitioners. So the practitioners that I named before, who have all completed racial equity training through Courageous Conversations About Race, there are actually 11 folks, but there are 9 people who are really serving on the racial equity team. And these are folks who really came forward to do this work in the pandemic. And not only are they passionate, but they are skilled and trained in sustaining conversation on racial equity in any given setting. They can identify and articulate the role of race in a proposal, in a program, and skilled at asking questions about how we can change it and make it more racially equitable. So yeah, I'll just go on to the next slide. What this practitioner group is offering is basically operational implementation of the racial equity tool, using the skills from Courageous Conversations About Race combined with the tools from GARE. And we offer what we're calling Racial Equity Mondays. So every Monday there's a set time that teams from Boulder County can come and understand and get feedback basically from the racial equity panel. They fill out a racial equity impact assessment. The teams make an attempt at doing that. So I'll give you an example. We've got, an economic vitality team that had CARES Act funding that was destined for small businesses, for instance. And they said, well, we have this idea about how to spend the funding. We're gonna fill out this impact assessment. We're gonna answer for ourselves who's gonna be benefited by this, who's gonna be burdened by this, what are the impacts, and how are we gonna mitigate that? And did we consult with the community? And then we come to the racial equity panel, which is a diverse group of people who are trained and skilled in conversations about race, and they give their perspectives. Some of the advantages of this racial equity panel, rather than having a team or an individual who is responsible, so to speak, for racial equity, is that it's a panel that has people from all areas of the county, a variety of departments. It's a very diverse group of folks who identify differently in terms of race and gender and sexual orientation, and it really allows for multiple perspectives, which is really hard to get, I think, in the traditional hierarchical structure of a county government. So this is part of the reason that we are piloting this format. We provide space for what's called open hours, and this is less specific to program analysis, and it's more for topics of reflection. So you can see some of the things that we've talked about here in open hours. We just set aside 2 hours every Monday. Actually, it's every other Monday to talk about a variety of topics. And this is a learning space for the wider community inside of Boulder County staff, basically right now, to bring topics that they're interested in and to learn more about racial equity, to really have a space to reflect for themselves about how they might be able to embed this work in their own departments and offices and on their own teams. I thought this was a little bit of a fun slide. I have a friend who calls it receipts, right? So if you think back to our work to embed racial equity in terms of our own perspectives and our own understanding, this is some of what I would call receipts. So some of the racial equity practitioners, and in terms of the work that they've been doing for their own personal exploration and their own training with their own work groups, has very clearly resulted in some strong emerging work in Boulder County. In the Parks and Open Space Department, where I come from, we are embarking on partnerships with the Latinx community, and I've been working with City of Boulder and City of Longmont, and we're developing some American Indian relationships and regional partnerships. The Boulder County has just rolled out a new equitable hiring and recruitment practice guidelines. We have one of our practitioners who is really piloting training for law enforcement in the Sheriff's Department. Our community services group and our housing and human services groups have all developed what I call communities of practice for really embedding racial equity in their programming and their policies and their department level, all their department level operations. We have some good advocates in our policy group that serves the Board of County Commissioners and as well as land use. And the thing that's in bold there is in health equity and cultural responsiveness in the pandemic response. And I, not to toot our own horns too much, but I can trace all of this effort back to really interruption begins with I, right? This is individual people examining their own racial identity, their privilege, their what their identity has to do with what their role is in a professional setting. So that's why I like that racial equity receipts. I think this is really hard to see, but I just wanted to give a little, say a little bit in terms of where Boulder County is going. So until now, our focus has really been primarily internal. And that was really at the direction of the last commission. And also it comes from the perspective of, we really feel like we need to get our house in order first. We want to partner with the community, and we don't want to do so in a way that's harmful. We want to be ready to do it in an authentic and truly a way that shares power with the community and builds community relationships that can be sustained. So we are working towards that, but definitely most of our efforts so far have been internally facing. And I don't know if people can make this bigger or not, but this is actually kind of a subset of this, which you guys might have seen before. And this is, along the lines of challenges, right? This is a document that's shared widely in anti-racist circles and in anti-racist work. It's a little bit of a rubric for kind of, understanding where you are as an organization. And I would say that it is our hope and dream, right, to get to be a fully inclusive multicultural organization in a transformed society. We're certainly not there yet, but that's where we're aiming to go. So I'll just leave you with this. And this is, I think I know the question is, what is Boulder County planning? And I guess I'm going to throw the question back out for people who are listening. What is your why for advancing racial equity, and how do you process your own experience and your own identity, and how does that inform you as a leader in terms of your role to advance racial equity? And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you to you both. We have quite a few questions and we only have 15 minutes. So
stop sharing.
There you go.
Okay, there you go.
All right. So, wow. I have like so many questions, but let's go to the questions of our audience. Someone asked, how will you engage the communities impacted by this institutional racism so that you truly have a shared analysis and where did I go? Shared analysis and definitions You need to get that right from the point of view of those communities before doing the rest. I believe this engagement needs to be a process over time and have accountability to those communities. I believe that to a deeper engagement, you have to go to their turf, describing a great start, but it sounds very white controlled and centered in the way the sessions are offered. So, and then the same person said that they would love to see the city and county use the Equity Action Lab approach, and they put the link in the chat. So if you all want to download that and look at it, you may have heard of it before. So that was one person asking those questions. I don't know if you got it all, but I mean, me too, because I mean, your presentations were very similar.
Mhm.
And I think, I don't know if the right word would be like audacious, because yeah, we all have this vision, but what does that look like? Right? What are the steps to get there? And I know you have this huge plan. But wouldn't it be more effective to do one thing good at a time and
Yes.
then move forward to the next thing? You know, people of color been shouting and crying and yelling for decades and centuries to say we're hurting, we're not being listened to, we're just as valuable as you are. So now we have a plan. So what is going to make it sustainable? I'm sorry, I just cut in. I think it would kind of all ties together. It's this, it's this person in the chat. So whoever wants to go first, you can answer that. All those I threw at you. Sorry.
Sure. Do you want to take that, or do you want me to start, Carrie?
Go ahead, Amy.
So thank you for that question. Yes, it is a plan at this point, and the plan was informed by community members. And as we're moving forward, it's really important to the point about engaging community members on their turf. And that's why we hosted with the community engagement process, really going out to the communities, even though we had to do most of those via Zoom, based on the relationships that we had with those community members. And we also know that there's community members who have told us time and time again, and yet we have not done anything about it, right? So it's talk. The plan outlines short-term outcomes, midterm outcomes, and long-term outcomes. And one of the things that the city of Boulder has built, and I know Carrie's colleagues at the Boulder County have done similar work, but we started this during the pandemic, a group of equity connectors and residents. And these are trusted community members who are trusted within their communities to be that liaison, similar to a cultural broker, but these are community members who don't work for the city. So we've got representation in our Latinx community, Nepali community, manufactured housing community, Black and African American community. So we can understand what the challenges are and what the needs are based in those communities and be able to disseminate information. And as we're going through racial equity instruments or the rapid response racial equity assessment, we're checking in with those communities. Is this the right path? Are we doing what we need to be doing in order to address this issue truly? And we've learned a lot from that work. By going out to the communities directly, we've really shifted some of the services that we've provided. I like to tell the example, our library team wanted to open up the library meeting spaces for 3 hours a day so Latinx children could come and have learning pods, but we couldn't provide tutors and because we didn't have the staff resources or the expertise to do that. And we couldn't do more than 3 hours. Otherwise, we had to have daycare licensing. And so what the community said is that's not helpful for us. That's really not what we need. We need better computer access and we need access for childcare. So we were able to work with community partners to get hotspots distributed throughout the school districts and through the library itself and get funding to provide those hotspots for those community members, as well as connect them with resources for childcare. So that's just one small example. That equity connectors that we developed just for the COVID response and recovery team has now shifted into equity connectors in residence. And so these are individuals who have a relationship with the city ongoing. I believe they're working at definitely for a year. I'm not sure what the commitment is. It's through a communication and engagement department. And they are paid a stipend for that work, because we also recognize we can't just keep going to community members and asking for input and perpetuating that harm. And so we are compensating those individuals for that work. So I really appreciate that question.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, especially when nothing is happening. So that's good things are happening, you know. Yeah, Carrie, did you want to respond quickly to that?
Sure. You know what? One of the things that occurs to me is most of our work in Boulder County has been internally facing, and I'll name a couple of notable exceptions, and that is the work of SUMA Latina and the cultural brokers in Boulder County, who are very much engaged and pivotal in designing the county's response to, for instance, the vaccine rollout and the pandemic and the response to the pandemic. But I will just say that that I believe very strongly that that community needs to be involved from the very beginning. And I'll give you an example of some of the work that we've been doing at Parks and Open Space is, we started out, Parks and Open Space started out wanting to make a kind of an inclusion plan for the Latinx community. And originally, the way that I'll just say it, the way that white folks at Boulder County Parks and Open Space have their initial conception of that is well, we should translate everything and maybe we should reach out to see if people like where we're going to put the trail. Right. But when we started to really partner with the Latinx community through some trusted partners, the conversation totally shifted. Right. So it's the idea, people started asking questions like, well, why do you buy the places that you buy? Like, let's go all the way back to the beginning. Like, let's back up the bus all the way to the beginning. Like, who gets to define what open space is? Who gets to define what properties you acquire? Why do you even call them properties, by the way, when you talk to the American Indian community? So we're really trying, and I feel like, at least from my perspective, that we want to get to a place where people who are employed by Boulder County and Boulder County staff really have an understanding of how to be authentically in partnership with the community and not just do a kind of like checkbox. We checked with the community. Yeah, we did some, like, we asked, we baked a plan, and then we went and said, what do you think? So that's the goal. And I get that it's hard. I know it's hard. But that, some of our work in Parks and Open Space is really informing, like as a model, that kind of thinking. Same thing with some of our American Indian relations work. We're really working to start from the beginning, like not just ask for input on particular items, but start from the beginning in the design of the relationship.
Great. Well, thank you for that. We have another question. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm trying to get in as many questions as I can. How might unions, in particular law enforcement unions, best interact with this model?
So I do a lot of work with our police department. When being after the Zaid Atkinson event with the city, in the city of Boulder, we started a community police oversight task force who really designed what a civilian police oversight model would look like, specific for the city of Boulder. That group of community members, they worked for a year and a half to, the first iteration of their work ended with an ordinance that was passed in October of 2019, and that was really setting up the foundation for that work. And it also laid the foundation for an implementation team to continue the work, which led us to hiring the first independent police monitor, as well as we just launched our police oversight panel. And what we had to do through that whole process is engage police throughout the process. Because the City of Boulder Police Department is a City of Boulder department, they are part of our racial equity core teams, some of them, and then also brought them along through the process of the civilian police oversight. So we're continuing that work with community engagement with the police master planning process. So it's hard, but absolutely 100% necessary. A colleague of mine says hard work is hard, and never a truer word was spoken.
Right. Okay. Someone asked, I see that the City of Louisville is starting an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force. Have they approached either of your organizations? And would you recommend that they do, or is it better for them to start from scratch as a community?
I'm nodding because I know that that some folks in the City of Louisville have been working with Boulder County just in terms of collaboration around training, the Courageous Conversations about Race training. So that's all I know.
So they've also, they have attended Advancing Racial Equity, the Role of Government, a few of them with the City of Boulder. And I know that they released an RFP for somebody to lead the design of that task force. What I'm not clear on, because I've not read the RFP myself, is whether the task force is an internal like racial equity core group like we have and like Carrie's team has at the county, or if it's a community facing task force. So that's what I don't know. I tend to agree with Carrie that clean up your own house before you start asking community to clean it up. And on the other piece of that that's so critical that somebody in the chat brought up is the importance of engaging community in that design. So I'm not quite sure what their plan is with that.
Okay. So Amy, I know there's other questions in here, but I have to ask this question. So get ready, take a deep breath. So inquiring minds want to know, yes, what happened to the City of Boulder Diversity Equity Officer? If we're going to be all inclusive, I think it's very important for the community to know that information, especially because the community I felt was very supportive of that hiring of that diversity officer. Yep. And then poof, magically she's gone. And we weren't told anything. It was like little kids, go to your room and shut the door. Don't worry about it, or sweep it under the rug. And I think in the past, that's what we are used to. All these issues being swept under the rug, pushed in the closet, and we don't address our past issues or past demons. And before we move forward, we just sweep it under and step on top of it and hope it smash down. And then we want to create a plan moving forward and say, oh, we're just going to start all over again. Right. That's not equitable, nor is it right. We're not all kids that live in Boulder County. We pay our taxes too. So I think it's important that we know, and I'm not saying it's your job to tell us, but I sure would like to know. Right. And many people who are going to watch this would like to know. And people are still asking, because I'm very heavily in the community, and people ask me all the time, like all of a sudden I'm supposed to know, but yeah.
So I will tell you from my perspective. One is it's a personnel matter, so I don't know the full details. Having done this work in our organization, I will say that I think when that position was created, there wasn't clear definition of what the expectations of the role, whether it was supposed to be an internal facing, clean up the internal house, or whether it was supposed to be external facing or some type of blend of the two. I think the position was also at that time housed in the Human Resources Department, which I tend to push back on. That's probably not the best level of support for this type of role. I think this type of role needs to be at a different level of position, or at least in a higher level department in an organization, depending on how a human resources is embedded within the organizational structure. I'd say in most government structures, it's not in the city manager's office or the county commissioner's office. So I don't think that the position was shaped or formed or had clear definition of what it was. I think it was white people saying we need to have an equity officer and not really defining what that role is, which unfortunately doesn't set anybody up for success, either community, organizationally. So having done this work for the past couple of years, that's where I see things were not done appropriately from the get-go.
Okay. Okay. So, of course, the answer you couldn't answer it. So,
I'm sorry. Yeah, I honestly,
I understand. I know
you this much information.
Yeah. So someone said, "Who gets to say what a clean house looks like?" But it is 7:30, and I just want to be mindful that it's important, for again, and I know moving forward, the county and the city, are both really trying to make sure that the community is heard, right? And I understand that, and it is truly important. Don't assume what someone needs. You need to ask what they need, because their needs may be totally different than what you're assuming.
100%.
So I do feel like the city of Boulder need to rectify that and inform the community as to what has happened with that diversity officer, because how can we trust anything they say moving forward? So that's my perspective. But I want to say it has been a pleasure learning everything in what you're doing. And I think we are all a little bit more hopeful within our community, and people that are here today can definitely, you left your email, they can get in touch with you if they have any questions. We appreciate your time tonight. I also want to thank Mandy for setting all of this up for us tonight. We are so appreciative, and we just thank you so much for giving us your time tonight and all the work that you're doing. We know it's not easy, and I know you get pushback all the time. So I want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Shakita. Thank you for moderating.
Yep, well done. Thank you.